And beyond that, I also got to help Mr. John Benner at Tactical Defense Institute teach a level 1 training program. So I get to see, both as a student and both as an assistant instructor on a volunteer basis, how beneficial the FASTER program is. I've taken a lot of training as both a police officer and a training junkie, as I like to call myself. And FASTER's one of those classes that I'll always remember and I'll always highly recommend because it was a high quality program. And as Jim said, not only do they teach you how to save lives by using force with a firearm if necessary, but they also show you how to stop bleeding, which is going to be something that's more likely a skill that you're going to have to use, and no matter what the situation is in life.
Okay. So, Paul, you want to introduce yourself before we move on? You're muted.
Yeah, I'm not hearing Paul.
How in the world does
Paul,
that happen? It may be just that I mute myself so you don't hear me hacking away in the background because, since I'm not on the SAF airwaves right now, I can honestly admit that I smoke, and you don't hear me hacking up a lung while I'm doing the switching. Anyway, I'm the Deputy Director of New Media for the Second Amendment Foundation. I started off a little tiny podcast, almost a little over 9 years ago, that called the Politics and Guns podcast. That grew into Polite Society, and that grew into the Self-Defense Radio Network, and now I'm affiliated with the Second Amendment Foundation. I do the daily and the weekly bullet. They pay me to make sure I am in your face 24/7, 365. So, and thank God they pay me because I do it for free, but man, I got bills.
There's that.
We are glad to have you.
So,
right.
Amanda, I'm going to go ahead and leave it up to you.
Okay. Well, the thing is I think that folks need an opportunity to hear more about what FASTER is, kind of where it started, what it does, and how are different schools, how are they receiving that, and what is their concept and what is their thought process on it? I'm going to toss it to Kyle first. So, Kyle, you worked for a school. Was the school involved in FASTER before you started, or did they get involved while you were there? And what was the overall feeling of it?
I pretty much started the FASTER program at my school. A good friend of mine introduced me to it, and she's Angela Armstrong with the Buckeye Firearms Association. And Angela introduced me to FASTER as soon as I became a school resource officer, and she talked about it and spoke highly of the training and the program itself. And then, excuse me, and then I decided I'm going to take this training and see what it's about. Because the school board was kind of back and forth about having an armed staff. And then basically, to make a long story short, I took the training, was highly impressed with it, and endorsed the program.
Okay, so you endorsed the program. You went back to the school and said, "This is what it is. So can others go?" Did they send others, or did you still have a fight?
Unfortunately, with the school that I was assigned to, there was some resistance as far as having an armed staff besides me, the SRO there. And unfortunately, it was something that never got passed by the board itself because it met some resistance with the administration there.
Okay. So I mean, and you can see that because there are groups who are extremely persuasive in the fact that they're like, well, guns are bad and we don't want them, without any concept that the guns stop active killers. So Jim, I'm going to toss this to you. Do you get that resistance, that kind of resistance, a lot, or is it a mix?
It's a mix, but we get that a lot. Schools look at this as a gun program instead of it, and so people who are anti-gun are opposed to it. And I tell them, look, it's not a gun program; it's a safety program, and everyone should be supporting this. Now, if you have some other thing to cover your violence besides armed staff, great. I don't care what you have. I care that you have something that is proven effective the vast majority of the time. Nothing is perfect, including our program, obviously. There's nothing that's perfect in anything we're dealing with this stuff. So having a school resource officer in the training, we always like that for any school that has them, because the school resource officer works as kind of the liaison between law enforcement and the school, and it allows the schools to do continued training going forward and things like that. And also, we want school resource officers to come with this neat background of law enforcement and other things that they've done. And so if they can point something out to us that makes our program better, we want to include that in. We want their thoughts because they've carried the gun in the schools. They've got the experience doing that. So we love having them in the class. And we want them to continue the training going forward with the staff. We've got schools now that do quarterly training with law enforcement and school staff get together, and they train once a quarter. And what we see is it's improved the school staff and law enforcement both keep raising the ladder on what they're doing. So the community wins every which way. It's a great thing.
That is a great thing. So can you give us the history? What started Faster? How did it come about? Because my understanding, and maybe I got this wrong, but my understanding is it started in Ohio and it is now spreading across the country. So give us the backstory a little bit.
I've been friends with John Benner for a long time and taking classes down at Tactical Defense Institute. And he had talked about it. I'd talked about it. Greg Ellifritz had talked about it. We were working on this for over a decade, seemingly with no progress. And Sandy Hook was really the catalyst that changed everything. It wasn't the first school killing. It didn't set a new record, but it was the age of the children that hit us differently. And it's just gut-wrenching. And I said to Mr. Benner, I'm like, if we did a class, could we hire you to do a class and train school staff on this? And he said, yeah, I've already got it. And so how many people? 24. So I said, hey, can I announce this on TV tomorrow night? He said, yes. We did. We were swamped. It's funny, media mocked me and said, teachers don't want to carry guns. Do you even think 24 people are going to sign up for your class? I said, I don't know. Well, we're going to find out. Well, in 3 weeks, we had about 1,000 people sign up for this training. So it's we did the first class. It was a nightmare, logistically, weather-wise, but the school staff who showed up were unbelievable. The neatest compliment we get is, you've changed my life. I'm a different person now after going through this training. That's really cool. They've changed me more than I've changed them. They've made me realize that in spite of all of the problems with our public school system, there is a lot of really good people who will die for our kids. And I tell school boards, especially, like, we don't get hostile ones in Ohio anymore. Everybody knows what we do. But in the beginning of the program, I think the big catalyst was, I said, I am sick of sending our kids to school and have them slaughtered at school. It's not acceptable to me. We are going to find somehow, some way to change this. So we've worked with John Benner at TDI, Chris Serino, and Andrew Blueblatt at Apex Training, and others like over in Indiana and other states. Out in Colorado's got their system running now. So we work with other people. Really what we do is we facilitate all of this stuff. So we did this first class. It was really neat, and the idea was just one class, but the demand and the caliber of people we got changed us, and we saw we need to do another class. We can't train 24 out of 1,000 and call that a job well done. So we just did one more and one more and one more, and it's evolved into this program. When I talk to school boards, I tell them, look, this is an adult conversation, and this is serious stuff. The reality is the vast majority of your school staff don't want anything to do with carrying guns. And they're like, no, they don't. I said, you don't want them carrying guns. And they're like, no, we don't. I said, we don't want to train them. We're all on the same page. And they're like, wait a minute, I thought that's what your program's about. I'm like, no, it's not. It's for the few special people. I said, we all agree on that, but can you agree to this? In every one of your buildings, you have at least one person who's going to that scene on event day. No matter what's going on, no matter what your policy is, no matter what the risk to their own life, they have a bond so strong with those kids, they are going to the scene on event day anyway, no matter what. And they're like, yeah, I can think of one, I can think of two, I can think of three people. I said, so how about we do this? How about we pre-identify those people? And then we get them some training in mindset, in shooting, in the medical stuff, so that when they get to the scene on event day, they live for our kids instead of dying for our kids. Isn't that a better lesson for our kids? How about they win for the kids? How about they end the violence before the next kid gets shot? And then how about they start treating the injured ones so that they don't just bleed out and die like we let go on in school after school after school? Is that really controversial? And sports will go, well, not when you put it that way. I'm like, that's the program in a nutshell. That's what we're doing. The key is you've got to train ahead of time. You've got to prepare for these things. I go down and train in a simulator every 9 months as an airline pilot for several days. Your school staff, not all of them, but the select ones who are going to do this need to be training on this regularly. And it's like, Kyle will tell you the same thing. The training is what matters. Law enforcement is an awesome validator, if that's a word, of what we do, because they get into confrontations. Does this work? And what we see is when law enforcement is well trained, they perform excellent, even under insanely ridiculous situations. When they skimp on training, and we have departments that don't train well, and the officer is not trained or doesn't take it seriously and shows up not prepared, it doesn't go well. And we see that in schools, but we see it play out every day in law enforcement. And law enforcement, by and large, does an awesome job at what they do. And so it's that partnering with that, learning what they have done, learning from law enforcement with all of this stuff, and not teaching teachers to be cops. They don't want to be cops. We don't want to make them cops. It doesn't work. What we want them to do is be able to end the violence and kind of stop that timeline, get a timeout in this killing, to get our law enforcement the time to get in the building, get on site and get in the building to really finish it. This is in no way a replacement for law enforcement. It's not a replacement of the school resource officer. It augments everything we have in place. And that's really it. That's it in a nutshell.
Well, that makes so much sense. So one of our listeners is asking, do you offer this also to individuals who like are at a mega church or at some kind of a bigger organization, so that they can have that, or do you speak at like church gatherings to be able to get them motivated?
Yeah, we started out just in education, but I think it was the killing in the South Carolina church that really galvanized churches to want to do. There were a lot doing it already on their own. We had churches say, hey, we want to send people through your program. We heard it's really good. How do we get involved? So we did one class and opened it up to churches, and it went really well. And the school thing was so secretive and so touchy at first that they didn't want to be with anybody else. We gave them the promise that it would only be school staff. That way you're not outed to anybody. And so that was the thing. Today it's kind of progressed past that. So we do mix church in with the school people, because it's really the same problem in the same situation, the same training. It's all of the same stuff. And even businesses are now saying, hey, wait a minute, we need to be doing that. So we've got businesses that come to it too. Now we do have grants to help out school. Like for Ohio, we talk about Ohio first. We have state funding, so that allows us to. We've got early bird specials through the whole month of March, and we may extend it because demand's low. Because thankfully we haven't had too many kids killed in the last year because everybody's at home instead of at school. So basically, it's $1,000 if they go sign up on the class. It's fastersaveslives.org. They can go sign up. It's a 3-day class. It includes a $100 trauma kit. And for schools that are new to the program, we give them a $5,000 grant to get going on this stuff. For returning schools, it's $2,000 a year. So that, and they can send new people, or they can send people who've been through before to a level 2 class or something like that. For out of state, we can't use state funding to do that. So, but we have some other funding on money we've raised. So we've got the same deal right now for everybody else in the country. They've just got to pay their own transportation to get here, and it's about 1,000 rounds of ammo. So the out-of-state stuff is limited because we can't use Ohio tax dollars to train other state staff and stuff like that. So, and for profit businesses, they have to pay their own way because we can't subsidize them. So, but we've done classes in Indiana, in Colorado, in Utah. We've discussed them in Florida and Georgia. COVID's kind of stopped everything, but we're looking at gearing up, stuff like that. So for schools that are out there, if you're a parent listening and, hey, my school needs to do this, number one is your state has got to be able to do it, which most states allow this. It sets the school board up, has the permission to do whatever they want. If it's just a few people, it's cheaper. Come to Ohio. We do the training in June, and the weather's great. Come on out, and we'll have some fun. If you're thinking about it, yeah, send a law enforcement trainer out to the training so that you can get their take on what we do. Because I can say the training's great. That's great. Maybe I'm a slick salesman, but I don't know anything about any of this stuff. And it's so send one of your trainers out to have them look at what we do and go back and say, hey, we think it'd be worth having these guys come out. If it's just a few people at school, come to Ohio. But if you've got 20 people that want to go through this, we'll work with your local law enforcement and use their ranges. We've done traveling classes in Ohio and other states. So we can do that. What we want to do is help other people. And look, if somebody's just got questions on it, text me, email me. I'm happy to do, like with Zoom now, we all do that. I'm happy to do church meetings and help people understand and stuff like that. And it's a labor of love. I do it because I enjoy it. I find it interesting. I'm the last. If you'd have told me 10 years ago what I'd be doing on this stuff, I'd have said, not likely. You don't even know me. It's not only not probable, it's not even possible with who I am. Yet, here I am, and this is the neatest thing I've ever been involved with outside of raising my own kids. And it's because of the trainers I get to work with. It's guys like Kyle who I get to interact with and what they're doing and taking back. And it's the school staff member who's never even shot a gun until sometime in the last few months, but they are willing to do anything, not for their kids, but for my kids. Somebody who's going to risk their life and is this vested in it for my kids, how do I not help them raise the bar and do better?
I think that's an amazing statement right there. I mean, somebody said to me one time that in a situation, you don't get to pick the time or the place or any of the facts that are happening. The only thing that you get to pick is your defensive tool and the amount of experience that you've got with it. And so some people pick that they don't have one at all, and others pick one and they do. So I think that this is sort of in there. I mean, I absolutely love it that it could be a school administrator or a teacher or the lunch lady, or that you'll never know who it is. So Kyle, you started to do this. So what as you've talked to people about it, what kind of things are you hearing from the outside in this program?
From the outside, not only from the students who have taken the fast recruit training program, who thought that it was a great program, but from the perspective of parents, which I think is an important thing that you need to consider in this. The majority of the parents in the district were very pro Second Amendment and pro teachers having the ability to protect their kids. But what we see a lot of times is sometimes we get that complacency where educators and also parents will see, okay, we got an armed school resource officer in the school, and they hope that is going to be good enough. The only downside to that is, what if I'm clear across the other side of the school when the event goes down? And like you said, the aggressor picks the time and the place and the opportunity and the victims. It's not something that we can unfortunately have a crystal ball and forecast that, hey, this is going to happen at this particular time at this school, at this event, or during the school day even. So that's why the training is so important. And unfortunately, I wasn't able to talk the school into getting the armed component in besides myself, but I was able to get the trauma side into the school, which was fantastic. We had trauma kits, gunshot wound kits inside every room in that school before I left, and that was something that I worked hard to get, and it took me about a year. But once they got the grants and the funding, every teacher not only had the kit, but I spent the time to take the training I've learned from FASTER and also TDI and other places, and train them in how to use a tourniquet, how to use a chest seal, how to wrap wounds, anything they needed to do to stop the bleeding. And I was very proud of the teachers at the school, because maybe not all of them were wanting to carry firearms, and that's fine. But all of them wanted to save lives in whatever way they could, and a lot of them saw the trauma aspect as their way to help.
Yeah, I could see that. So to some, that is the most palatable portion of the program. But Jim, could you roll out to us some of the data on? I know in some of the active shootings, the active killers, that it's not the initial gunshot that would then actually cause the demise of the student. It was the prolonged period of time before the EMTs and the secondary, I guess, first responders were allowed in the buildings.
Yeah, it's Ron Borsch has done a lot of work on this. He actually coined the phrase "stopwatch of death," which is the logo on the shirt here. It's got the stopwatch on it. It's a nod to him on that. So the bottom line is, what we see in these active killings is, on average, you're getting about 4 people a minute shot. Virginia Tech was closer to 7 to 8, and half of those die. So let's put that in perspective and think about gunshots. 90% of people shot with a handgun in this country survive it today, because our medical is that good at saving people and treating gunshot wounds. It's outstanding. It's really cool. So, but think about like World War II. If you were a soldier on a battlefield in World War II and you got shot, you had a 75% chance of survival. So we've gone from 75 to 90 in 60 years. That's really cool. But it's only 50% in a school or a church, any mass killing. Why? And there's 2 things that really drive that data. Number one is, whether you're a citizen today who gets shot or a soldier and gets shot, you had treatment. Somebody dials 911. A medic comes and treats you on a battlefield. We start treating the injured. In our schools, in our churches, we let the victims lay there and die because we're waiting on police to come clear the building, and then we're going to wait for EMS to come in. With the timeline on it, you bleed to death of a gunshot wound first. Look at Jacob Hall down in South Carolina. A 6-year-old boy shot in the leg with a .22 on the playground. We play that 911 tape in our medical classes, and it's 4 minutes of hell every single time. I hate that tape. I know he dies every time, but you're just hoping once it will go different. Of course, you're listening to a tape, it's never going to go different. But it's gut-wrenching to listen to the horror in the staff's voice begging for help, and the 911 dispatcher just says, they're on their way, they're coming as quickly as they can, just hold on, they're on their way. Well, guess what? There's no way the medics can get in the building in time to save that kid. He's going to live or die based on the school staff and their training. What the school staff did was put AEDs on him. Why? Because they're trained to use an AED. They did what they were trained to do. I do not fault the staff. That is not why that little boy is dead. He's dead, number one, because some criminal went and shot him. But he's dead, number two, because the school never trained their people in the thing that killed that child. And that's, look, it's negligence. I don't know any other word to use. It's if you get in a car accident and you're not wearing a seatbelt, well, I've never been in an accident on this road. We've never had an accident in our district, whatever. It's negligence. We know accidents happen. I can't tell you when, where, or how, but I know there's going to be a traffic accident, several of them tomorrow, and people are going to die. There's going to be school killings, and kids are going to die. If you don't have the ability to treat those in your school, you are negligent. And it's not just the gear, it's the training that goes along with it. And look at what Kyle did. He took it on himself and got his district changed. If your school board doesn't want to do it, persist, work on them. Every district, one person changes it. One person's the key to get them to go, okay, we don't want to do the guns, but we'll do the medical. Fine, do the medical, start there. Because in time, they'll see other stuff, or it gets people thinking about these events differently, and that's the mindset is the most important thing. If they can change the mindset to realize this is our responsibility, this is our job, they look at everything different. So it's really important. It's all of this stuff. I guess a couple other things that are important to understand is before they ever start with us, everyone looks at it and goes, 3 days, you can't learn everything in 3 days. Well, no, of course not. But before you start, you have to have a concealed carry license. And in any state you're in, that's federal law. You got to have a concealed handgun license to carry in a school zone. So there's some other exemptions to get you around that. But if you're a law enforcement officer, you're in your own house, stuff like that. But for your school staff, they've got to have a concealed carry license. Even if your state has constitutional carry, it doesn't matter. You got to have a license. Number two, we want other training beyond that before you even start with us, because the higher level you come in, the higher level someone like John Benner or Andrew Blubaugh can kick you out the other end. So the more training you have, the better before you come to us. But it's got to be good training. I mean, I, like a bunch of other people, went to the range and shot guns for a long time and spent money building bad habits. And because I thought it was too expensive to buy good training. Man, was I stupid. But so work with us and we'll get you with good instructors. You've got to be with somebody who knows what they're doing, so the training feeds into what we're doing, and it all goes together. And then at the end, it's not over at the end of 3 days. We've got a level 2 class. We've got a level 3 class. You should be training with your local law enforcement. If your local law enforcement doesn't want to do this and doesn't want to play ball, fine, go to a neighboring district or come back to us. At the very least, be reading a book every year. Be reading, going to lectures. Lieutenant Colonel Grossman, or his books or lectures are awesome. Dr. William Maple isn't available anymore. He passed away, unfortunately. But there's always learning going on, and that's really a critical thing for everybody to be doing.
I want to jump in if I could, and I want to bring up things from an EMT's perspective. I was an EMT long before I was a broadcaster or anything like that. I trained as a very young man as an EMT in a rural South Dakota fire department. And I will say this, in every emergency medical unit nationwide, in the start of their training, it is drilled in the very first lesson you go. The first question you ask is the scene safe? Every person who works in EMS, if they're professional, is going to wait until the police have cleared the scene. With a large scene, that's going to take a while. The reason I want to put that out there is I don't want anybody thinking the EMTs, the paramedics, the firefighters are cowards for not going in. It's simply they are not allowed, and their training precludes it until the law enforcement who's supposed to be going in and are really a reactionary force, but they're the ones that are supposed to stop the bad things happening, then you can go in and treat. Well, if they've got to clear a school, and think about a school, it's a huge building with a lot of rooms, even the smallest ones have a lot of rooms. So they got to go in and clear each and every one. It's going to take a long time. That's why I think, Jim, your training medically of the school staff is so critically important in training in saving lives, even if the people who take the training do not take the defensive shooting training. I think the medical training is something every person who works in a school should have.
Yeah,
I think that Go ahead, Jim.
I compare it to, like, you've got a kid in a pool, and somebody says, hey, so-and-so's at the bottom of the pool. Are you dialing 911? Yes, you are. We need medics. But if we now stand around and wait and watch this kid at the bottom of the pool till medics show up, guess what? He's dead. That would never, ever be allowed. You go in the water, you bring the kid back up, you do CPR, you do whatever you can so that you transfer a live body to the EMS. That's all we're talking about doing, but we're doing it with trauma injuries instead of drowning injuries. But it's the exact same point. The medics are awesome. They will do anything they can. They'll risk their own lives on stuff they shouldn't even do. And they do it all the time for us. But the timeline doesn't allow them to be there. If your school doesn't at least want to do this, read the book Why Meadow Died by Andy Pollock. It's about the Fort Lauderdale.
Parkland.
Parkland, thank you.
Parkland.
And his daughter was on the 3rd floor, and she bled out and died of her injuries because no one ever treated her. There are people, look, you get shot in the head with a high-caliber rifle round, and it goes through your brain. There's nothing we can do to save that individual. So there's people that are going to die. But there's a lot of others that have wounds that are easily treatable. All we have to do is stabilize the patient, stop the bleeding. Now they're good. Now they can sit there for the 45 minutes that it takes the cops to clear the building and get the medics in there. We'll transport them to a hospital. We'll get them to a surgeon. We'll fix them. They're going to go on with their life. It's amazing what we can do today. All we need the school staff to do is be able to stop the bleeding and stop that timeline for our medics to get in the building. It's all they have to do, and it's easy. And the same 3 hours you learn how to run an AED, which is in every school in Ohio and the vast majority in the country, you can learn how to treat at least 80% of the survivable casualties in this stuff in the same 3 hours. It's easy.
I want to bring in a social media comment. Doug Diane Murphy on YouTube, says, I was an older student at OSU when the Virginia Tech shooting took place. I didn't like the OSU police chief's answer. The class I was in was going to fight back with everything we had. No hiding. That brings up a question. Jim, a lot of the teachers, and I mean a lot of the teachers that we've seen in the mass shooting incidents, they die standing in front of their students, trying to block access to the students by the shooter. Wouldn't it be wonderful if they had their own firearm? Is it a 100% chance they're going to stop it? No. But give them a chance to stop it.
At Virginia Tech, a Holocaust survivor stood at the door taking rounds while he was giving instructions to his students how to pull the windows out of the frames and get out, because the windows were too small to get out in the building, which is part of why it was selected, because then our SWAT guys can't, like, our cops like Kyle can't get in the building because we chained the doors and we've got small windows and our victims can't get out. It was all a pre-planned event. And it wasn't even the first first shooting on the campus of Virginia Tech that year. One thing, we call them active killers. At Ohio State, it's interesting. The police showed up and there was a delay in response because they were responding to an active shooter, and shooters have guns. So he's looking for the person with the gun. Guess what? The guy didn't have a gun. He had like a machete or a hatchet or axe or something that he's hacking and chopping people with. That caused, we don't lie to our cops. They've got a really tough job. Give them accurate information, and we need to call it an active killing, not an active shooting. That puts our cops in a better position responding, and everybody else, to be able to find our killer and stop him and save lives.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. Let's talk just a minute about why do the police kind of block in a building and keep the EMTs out and the people in? Because there's a lot of people who, when they hear that, they're like, well, why? Why can't they do it faster? Why this? Why that? And part of that reason is that they don't know, is there a singular shooter? Is there a singular killer? Is there multiples? Is it like Columbine? Are there a couple of them scoring points? And so they have to identify that before they risk more people to go into the enclosure. Any comments?
Yeah, I got some. For years, the main priority as far as EMS, in order to help people, you first cannot be a victim. So that's why the policy for years and years and years has always been, the police make sure the scene's safe before fire and EMS respond. When I attended the Faster Saves Lives program in 2018, I saw that and I'm like, I wonder if we can possibly change this policy and possibly train EMS to respond along with law enforcement into hot zones in order to get to the victims and treat them quicker. I posed this idea with a bunch of agencies and the sheriff's office, and believe it or not, within the last year to 2 years, we've actually been training alongside EMS and escorting, if you will, law enforcement with their firearms, escorting these EMTs within minutes of the scenarios that we're doing. That way, instead of 45 minutes, victims are being treated a lot faster. And I think that represents the future for law enforcement, fire, and EMS training when responding to these active killer events. But until then, we need, and even after that, the best cure is immediate treatment for these kinds of injuries. If you don't have that, that clock's ticking. Each second that clock ticks, you're bleeding more and more, especially if it's an artillery bleed where in 30 seconds you can die. But if there's a teacher who's trained in that classroom to take care of that wounded student, that's going to give that student a lot better chance than waiting 3 to 4 to 10 minutes at the best possible case if we're using the current tactic that's starting to be trained into EMS of going in with a team of law enforcement who are armed to escort them to the wounded as soon as we can basically take out the killer.
Great. I mean, I love hearing and seeing the progress. I mean, because frankly, we are learning from each one of these horrific situations. We're learning, we're modifying, and in some cases, those slime buckets are learning from the prior active killer as to what else. And so we've got to be learning and reacting and responding so that we're getting better, or they get ahead of us, and that's unacceptable because our children are our future. So Jim, let's move on to start talking a little bit about involving other states. And so how did you go from, okay, you've got this in Ohio, to saying, I know I've talked to Laura Carno in California or Colorado, but Indiana, I know that Pennsylvania at one point was contemplating. So are there other states, or is it just still a little secret?
We've trained people in about 20 different states now. So the majority of states do allow the school boards to authorize this if they want. It's just local level, and they decide. the training is where people get hung up on. They want hours of training, and Kyle can comment on this too. I always tell them, look, the hours of training doesn't get you anything. You can spend 100 hours with a bad instructor and still not know anything. We hire world-class instructors because our schools don't have the time to waste with a bad instructor. And we cram, it's a 3-day class. We cram an insane amount of stuff in this 3 days, which is why you've got to come in being a pretty competent shooter or you're going to be in trouble in this class, because we're going to push you hard. I tell people it is physically and emotionally exhausting. And that still doesn't grasp how hard it's going to be for them, a lot of them. But it gets them on the right page. But it's the other thing is just to continue the standards that we hold them to. Indiana has good law enforcement standards. Ohio's law enforcement standard is atrocious. So we hold our school staff to a much higher standard than Ohio does law enforcement officers. Indiana has a really, I think, a good qual that they shoot. But, I mean, it's important to be shooting a qual every year with any gun you're carrying. This isn't a once-and-done thing. It's not a check a box like most things in education and a lot of stuff in our life is. It's a commitment for a lifestyle change that you're going to be a professional with this and you're going to take this up. And we've seen, look, some people go through the class and they're like, whoa, I didn't realize the ask here. I can't do this. You know what? That's fine. We have to select out most classes. There's nothing wrong with the person who realizes this is not my role. My role is in a medic. My role is in other stuff. There's lots of different ways to help on this. But to me, it's training. The training is really the key, and it's got to be good training. And you really need to be working with your local law enforcement, local EMS, and getting everybody on the same page. If we don't train together, we're not going to function together as well as we otherwise could on event day. But, I mean, Kyle's in a better position to talk about that and how important it is for a school resource officer or a responding law enforcement officer and the relationships you have and how all of that works.
Absolutely, Jim. The responsibility of a school resource officer, I think, is highly underrated. And armed school staff. I mean, you're asking a person to go from their normal everyday activities to when the event happens. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. When the event happens, to taking a child's life in order to save others. That the kind of training that one needs to be able to succeed in this role is, like Jim said, you have to have that mindset that I'm going to protect everybody else, even if that involves taking another life, unfortunately. You have to have not only the mindset, but the skill. You know, can you make that shot on that student with your handgun from where you are to the end of the hallway? The school I was at, the largest hallway was 110 yards. So that's a lot to think about, especially with a handgun. I was fortunate I was able to get the rifle in the school in order to respond to that in a discrete location. But it takes not only marksmanship, mindset, but also tactics, knowing how to move about in that. It's going to be, for the lack of better words, insane environment. You're going to have kids running around screaming, staff possibly panicking, going around you, kids grabbing a hold of you, and they're going to need direction in order for you to be able to do your job. And you're going to have to remain cool and calm in the midst of all this and do what you have to do in order to save lives.
I want to bring up a point, and that is when I took training this past year, back in October, my understanding, and Jim, correct me if I'm wrong, the shooting qualification that Faster uses for their level 1 class, their very beginning class, is the FBI qualifications. Is that right?
We use the Ohio law enforcement qual, but we add 3 shots while moving to it, and we hold them to a much higher standard. We make them shoot 26 out of 28 instead of 20 out of 25, the Ohio law enforcement standard. We've used the FBI in level 2, and I know several schools that have gone to that for their qualification. They make their school staff pass the FBI qual with any gun that they're going to carry at least once a year. Some do it twice a year. So it's the schools. The bottom line is our schools hold their staff to a higher standard than our state holds our law enforcement officers.
Yeah.
And that's kudos to the school staff. I do joke with our attorney general. I'm like, look, am I asking that much that in 6 months you can't get our cops to the same standard we get teachers to in 3 days? And it's embarrassing for the state. Ohio has the worst law enforcement qual of any state that I'm aware of. Now, I don't have some massive study on it, but in the schools we've trained in, Utah, Colorado, Indiana, Pennsylvania, they all have very, I think, appropriate law enforcement quals. You can argue this, that on anything, but it's reasonable. Ohio's is insanely stupid easy, and it's just, to me, it's not acceptable. And look, you miss a shot defending your own house and different things, that's fine. But in a school environment, misses are not acceptable. Yep. You cannot risk somebody else's life trying to save somebody's life. Like we point out to them, look, an act of killing is the worst day anyone is ever going to have to live through, and worst event you're going to have to respond to. This is horrible. But don't for a second forget that it can't start getting worse. If you get your gun out and you start helping the killer kill the kids, you are not helping. You're making it worse. And you can't do that. And you know what? You might need to watch a couple more kids die while you move to a position that allows you to safely and accurately put shots on target. And if that's what you have to do, you've got to know that ahead of time. That goes to the mindset, and that's really important. It's really frustrating. We've got a case before the Ohio Supreme Court. Our Chief Justice, Maureen O'Connor, does not understand that there's a difference between a concealed carry license holder who got authorized by the school district to carry a gun and help out in one of these events, and a law enforcement officer in the scope of their duty. Our Supreme Court, and she's not the only one, we have multiple justices kept talking about there is some duty that they have to respond and shoot a gun and stop this guy. And we're like, no, they are not cops. They don't have a duty to do this. It is absolutely wrong. They may not be able to. Their first role, if you're a second grade teacher, you're not leaving your classroom and say, hey, good luck, kids. I hope it turns out well for you. Their job is for those kids in their classroom. It's somebody else's job's in charge of somebody else's classroom. And that's why you need multiple people who can act in different roles on this stuff. But it's frustrating to me that really intelligent people and attorneys don't grasp the difference between someone who's volunteered for this role and a professional law enforcement officer. And look, we need them both in the schools. It's not a one or the other. It's like water and oxygen. Which one do you need to live? Well, you need them both, folks. If I short you either one, you're going to die soon. So it's everything together. You've got to do everything you can to save somebody's life. This idea that we're going to do this and that, but we're not doing something else, or we're going to want citizens to act like cops because they're going to. It doesn't work. Everybody's got a role. Everybody's got a job, and everybody has to do their role and their job, and they have to be trained how to do it. It's funny. One of the other things, like with training, I point out, school staffs are like, "So are you telling us we need to have armed staff?" We're like, "No. We're telling you if you have armed staff, you have to train them well, not just not a concealed carry class. This is a higher obligation. Right. It requires more training. If you're going to authorize people to carry a gun in your building, you need to make sure that they are properly trained and that they continue this training and they are ready, able, and willing to respond for the worst day that anyone can ever imagine."
Oh, and that makes so much sense because that continue the training. There are some people who've gotten their concealed carry licenses from an instructor who stunk, and if they could just buy the 6 bullets that they need for their revolver and never buy another bullet, they'd be perfectly happy. And they'd just carry that gun around for the rest of their life and hope that they never have to use it. And it's a magic talisman to just make it so that they're safer.
I can buy a scalpel. It doesn't make me a surgeon.
I love that. You can buy a guitar, it doesn't make you a guitarist, and it certainly doesn't make you Jimi Hendrix. We had a comment come through a minute ago. Had a shooting at Polaris Mall today, and some people in stores waited 3 hours to be escorted out. Thousands affected today, police and mall security. Thankfully, Jim, I'm wondering, or Kyle, whoever wants to take this, if you have children in schools, thankfully mine are all grown and gone. I've got grandchildren in school now, but my advice would be if there's an active killer situation, get out. Don't shelter in place. If there's a way out, get the out.
Run.
Yeah. What do you guys think?
Go ahead, Kyle.
Okay, I was waiting on you, Jim. Then I was gonna share my 2 cents. But the whole running thing is a lot better than hiding. You know, the whole hiding under the desk in the library at Columbine led to a lot of easy targets for the active killers. So hiding is definitely not something that I would recommend. If you can, there are no real guarantees, but if you're fairly certain that you can get out of that area without being shot, if you don't have that option to fight, then the best course of action is to get out of there. If you can't get out of there, what I would recommend you do is barricade yourself into a room to make it pretty much impenetrable for the active killer to get into. We did a lot of hardening and strengthening of the doors to where there were deadbolts and other things inside the school to where I couldn't get in unless someone let me in. And I tried everything I could to get into rooms during drills. And unless you're able to barricade yourself in a fortified room, like the plan was when I was the SRO, the best option is to get out of there if safe to do so. And if there's no other options, you need to, pardon my French, but you need to fight like hell, because if you don't, it's your life and others' lives that are going to be impacted.
Yeah, exactly. Just to tag off a couple things Kyle said, we do a mindset class where it's teaching all your school staff, hey, what can you do on this? It has nothing to do with guns. It's the barricading doors, simple things like this that they're easy to do, and you don't need a whole lot of resources to do them. As far as deadbolts, some states you've got to deal with fire codes, and so you've got this balance between fire and safety. Well, look, no matter what we have, we want the guys like Kyle to be able to get in the building and to be able to get in classrooms and save people. So you need something. This is why you've got to train with your law enforcement. They need to know what you're doing, and they need to know how to defeat it. The whole world doesn't know how to defeat the system, but your law enforcement and firefighters and EMS need to know how to defeat your systems and get in those rooms to save people. So you've got all of that, and some of it is simple, easy stuff that people can do, and it's cheap. And so we've seen it's funny. We've seen schools come up with some incredibly creative ideas on ways to do things, and ridiculously cheap. I mean, work with a builder and scrap materials literally for free, and they have stuff that you can't get through in a short amount of time. Law enforcement has the ability to do it, but it's really neat what schools have done. And that's the biggest thing. It goes back to mindset. Schools that have been doing this for 6-8 years now, they are so many iterations ahead of schools that are just starting out or have done it in the last year, because all of their staff are thinking different. They're seeing a problem before it's ever a problem. And then they're doing something really simple. Hey, you know what? Our kitchen has food that comes in, and there's a door that's open there all of the time to bring food in, or when it's too hot. Guess what? Your whole building's not secure anymore. So what can we do about it? Well, some schools put up a camera there and they have somebody monitor it. Other people just take somebody like a hall monitor who stands there and watches the door and guards it. And you don't have to do anything huge. But if somebody comes up to your building that doesn't look right or doesn't belong, you don't know him, then shut the door. Just simple things like that. It can be really that easy. If you can keep the killer from ever getting inside your school, do it. The other thing that Kyle mentioned was like different options. That is critical. We've had schools go, you have to do A or you have to do B. Well, you can't pre-think every weird thing that's going to happen. You have got to give your staff options. You can give them options A, B, C. Look, this is what we want. But nothing works all of the time. And you've got to empower your staff to use their brains and look at whatever situation's going on and do what is best right here, right now to save those lives.
Right. I think one of the best things that I heard in an Alice training class was giving people permission to break the school rules on a day that there is something catastrophic going on. So if the rule is don't break the windows in the school, yet there's somebody outside or somebody out in the hallway and you can get them out, then go ahead. You know, it's that kind of thing. Give them permission to think outside of the traditional school rules. And I think Columbine taught us that.
Yeah, that's a great comment. So we had a school and a class, I think this was even a level 2, where the school district had a bunch of people in it, and we're doing the scenario training, and none of them would take command and control the situation. And we were so frustrated. And finally, one of the staff goes, well, we're not allowed to yell. We're never allowed to raise our voice. That's a school rule. And we're like, that's fine, but you have a chaotic situation. You need to take control. You need to yell louder than whatever else is going on and own this room. And they're like, well, we're not allowed to. We're like, you need to have a conversation with your superintendent and fix your rules then, because
right.
in a normal world, your fighting is not allowed. But someone comes in your room and is killing your teacher, your classmates, your kids, your fellow human beings. Fighting is not only acceptable, it's demanded now. You have to do something. If you don't, more people are going to die. And it comes back around to mindset. You've got to think about it. Like Chris Reno says, the body will not go where the mind hasn't been. And if you're not thinking about any of these scenarios now, you're behind the ball, and kids are going to die on your watch. It's just not acceptable.
Right. I think you're so right. So, okay, there's a question that says, do you train medical staff also? That's the biggest thing that can save injured people till help arrives. Yeah, I think they came into the middle of the program because, yes, indeed, that is a portion of the program, is that it is a stop the bleed or a trauma training in addition to firearms training. Hey, I promised you an hour show. We are just hitting that hour, so I'd like to work our way out. So Kyle, why don't you go back and reintroduce yourself, let people know where they can find you, and then we'll go from there.
Okay, just real quick, I have some closing words to kind of piggyback on what Jim said. You need to have a plan no matter what the situation is. Without proper training, you don't know how to plan. My name's Kyle Leont. I am the owner of Surprise Break Firearms Training. Also was a school resource officer for 3 years. You can get a hold of me at www.surprisebreak.com if you want more information on the training we provide there. And also you can get a hold of me via email at surprisebreak@hotmail.com.
Okay, so Jim?
Jim Irvine, one of the co-directors with Faster Saves Lives. You can learn all sorts of information on this. Our website is fastersaveslives.org. If you're interested in the training, sign up for the email alerts. It's really low volume. We don't sell it to anybody. It's all protected. And start learning on stuff. If you have questions or you want more information, email me, jim@fastersaveslives.org, or you're welcome to call or text me. My cell phone is 440-503-3011. I'm an airline pilot, so hours of the day, days of the week mean nothing to me. If I'm in the air, out of the country, or asleep, it goes to voicemail, I'll call you back.
Okay, there you go. That's brave, giving your cell phone number, because man. So, I'm Amanda Suffecool.
Anyway,
go ahead.
I get calls all the time on this. There's nothing outside of working with my own kids. There's nothing I'd rather do than help someone else who wants to know how to save somebody else's kids. That's the most noble thing in the world. I will set time time aside, I'll talk to anybody on it.
And that is so great. That is so great. So, folks, I'm Amanda Suffecool from Eye on the Target Radio, and I'm going to toss this to Paul. And thank you very much for joining us on the Armed Society.
Yeah,
Paul?
everybody, my name is Paul Lathrop. I'm the Deputy Director of New Media for the Second Amendment Foundation. And I want to thank you all for watching. I want to thank everybody for the great comments. They are still coming, but I'm not going to be able to get any more on. Just thank you for watching. We do this every Wednesday night. It's part of the Self-Defense Radio Network. We have a different host on the show. They bring a couple of guests and their own topic, and the show goes anywhere and everywhere. So I would encourage you every Wednesday night at 6 p.m. Central Time, the only time zone that matters. Sorry, everybody here, but thanks for watching this week. Come join us next week. I do not yet know who the host is going to be. I do not yet know what the topic is going to be, but I guarantee you it's going to be interesting. Thanks for watching, everybody.